Let me say hello and welcome everyone. I'm Ruth Tyrrell, I'm National Delivery Director for Getting It Right First Time, and I'll be the facilitator today for this PAC session. Just some housekeeping to begin with. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the session. You can submit questions using the Q&A button. So we're on Zoom, so it's Q&A today. If we don't get around to answering all the questions, we will take a note of them and respond to them separately. We will be running some polls and a word cloud during the session to get some audience input. They are straightforward, so I'd ask that it'd be great if you could join in at the appropriate time, and we'll give you directions when it comes to that time. And finally, yes, we'll be sharing the slides, and this is being recorded today, and we'll post this on the GIRFT Academy Best Practice Library website, and we put the link in the chat so you can find that easily. Where you'll also find the toolkit itself, actually. And the website is open to all, so there are no passwords to access. So as I hope you know, Getting It Right First Time is a data-driven clinical improvement programme. It's all about improving quality of patient care by tackling unwarranted variation. As an improvement programme, we've expanded from originally 1 and up to 11 and now over 40 specialties. Since moving into NHSEI earlier in the year, like many others, we've been focusing on supporting COVID and now the recovery post-COVID. Hopefully it's post-COVID. But we're also hoping to announce some new work streams over the next 4 months, as well as our elective recovery work. I'm really thrilled today to launch this toolkit. Calderdale and Huddersfield FT and University Hospitals Plymouth are real exemplars of how to get the most out of GIRFT. And the toolkit they've put together is really about sharing good practice in a practical way so you can get the most out of the GIRFT programme. It's about bringing the programme to life for those who are in the early stages of putting together your own governance, and to help troubleshoot for those who've already got an established approach to GIRFT. So I'm really excited at the development of the toolkit, and thanks to colleagues for all your hard work on this. But let me pass over to them to tell you all about it. So if I hand over to Neeraj.
Thanks, Ruth. We'll just bring our slides up. So pleased to meet you all. I'm Neeraj Bhasin. I'm a consultant vascular surgeon and the Trust clinical lead at the Calderdale and Huddersfield NHS Foundation Trust. And I'm delighted to be able to introduce the toolkit that was developed collaboratively between CHFT and University Hospitals Plymouth NHS Trust. I'm so pleased that beyond a corporate document, it's been brought to life in such an interactive way. And we at CHFT have been able to supplement that by creating a suite of videos, which I hope it will make it easier for you to understand and then implement a structure and process into your organisation. As an organisation, we've been committed to GIRFT as a major part of our quality improvement methodology from a really early stage, mainly due to the fact that it is so clinically and importantly for us, MDT driven. The toolkit, the process and the structure, understanding that you may need to adapt that to your organisation, has enabled us to embed and ingrain GIRFT into our organisation's language, culture and business as usual. We found the deep dives to be really supportive, a really nice balance between highlighting what is exemplar from your service, whilst equally describing what needs some development. Through embedding the structure and processes that are described in this toolkit, we've then been able to adapt the evolving facets of GIRFT in terms of the the National Consultant Information Programme and the high volume, low complexity work streams into our daily working lives, because we've established that foundation with the structure we're going on to describe. My colleagues from the CHFT trust level core GIRFT team will describe all of that alongside the challenges and benefits. But for us, GIRFT has allowed us to identify and further enable clinically driven service development to deliver improving patient experience, safety, outcome, and most importantly, care.
Hi, my name is Claire Vickers, Head of Nursing for the West Yorkshire Vascular Service. I also provide nursing leadership for the Calderdale and Huddersfield NHS Foundation Trust GIRFT programme. Optimisation is about utilising the GIRFT programme as an enabler for clinically led service improvement, allowing positive challenges to practice through clinical peer review with the ultimate aim of improving patient care and experience. Supported by the executive team who provides sponsorship, collaboration and a reporting structure, empowering teams to deliver continuous quality improvement for the benefit of patient outcomes and experience. This is very important to ensure GIRFT is embedded in trust level processes and significantly increases the impact of the programme within a trust. Identification of stakeholders, which includes internal within the trust and external stakeholders, primary and community care and other organisations. For example, colleagues from the ambulance service were invited to our emergency department GIRFT deep dive visit, and our community service providers were invited along to the diabetes deep dive. Multidisciplinary engagement and attendance at the deep dives ensures a wide range of professionals bring expertise with varying roles and responsibilities, an approach which is inclusive of clinical and non-clinical members of the specialty. For example, the specialty team triumvirate will nominate key members alongside finance, HR, coding, informatics and support service colleagues. It's not just about senior colleagues, but all members of the specialty team who play a part in the patient pathway. The deep dives provide an excellent positive learning environment for clinical improvement. Involve everyone. For example, when the deep dives were face-to-face, large conference rooms encountered standing room only. Finally, ensure the full patient pathway is represented.
Hello, my name is Asfa Ali and I am the Research Innovation Lead and GIRFT Facilitator at the Trust. There can be some initial challenges to ensuring GIRFT is embedded across organisations, and these are some of those that we've encountered, and this is how we've addressed them. Immediately after the deep dive session, we guide our clinical teams to initially focus on 5 key metrics. This session usually lasts no more than 30 to 40 minutes and allows for primary actions and leads to be immediately identified. Secondary actions are collated on a separate spreadsheet and then followed up within a week or 2 with the team, where the action plan is then formalised. Historic and incorrect data is often highlighted by local teams, and we emphasise that this is their data. And if this appears to be incorrect, we suggest that an internal review is undertaken. This is where our information analysts assist the team in reviewing any anomalies and help to provide a rationale for it. Sometimes this can be due to coding errors or the way in which the data has been collected. It can sometimes lead to actions to rectify the problem where possible. Or sometimes a data refresh can be extremely helpful and change an outlier position to be within the benchmarking range. It is important that the clinical specialties take ownership of their deep dive data pack and recognise this as a reflection of their service. Having early conversations with clinical teams and highlighting the positive aspects of the report are important and effective. This then leads to acceptance and a drive to improve where they can. It is also important to ensure that the actions have identified leads so the burden of delivery is shared. Teams are encouraged to map their GIRFT actions to existing areas of quality improvement and to utilise GIRFT as an effective tool to optimise and accelerate changes. Engagement is key to delivering GIRFT across the organisation, and we have done this by ensuring early consultation with specialty teams, providing an introductory session to GIRFT and its metrics, and we've ensured an MDT approach so that clinical and non-clinical areas are fully informed of what to expect. This early engagement allows us to pool this expertise from a range of colleagues and look at the wider benefits and draw out any cross-cutting themes. It also provides an opportunity for different clinical areas to work towards mutual improvement actions. Some will see GIRFT as extra work within an already pressured environment, and it can be difficult to convince them otherwise. The way that we've approached this is to help teams use GIRFT as part of their business as usual plans and the quality improvement facet of their work. We demonstrate the utility and synergy that GIRFT can bring to provide a benchmarking structure to drive that improvement. A change to the way national deep dive sessions now present does mean that there are different technical challenges. Moving from a face-to-face to a virtual meeting can limit interactions. This is where our pre-meet ensures a multidisciplinary gathering of core personnel and is an essential and prerequisite to any deep dive visit. It allows us to review the data pack in advance, undertake any immediate reviews in preparation for the deep dive, and manage expectations on the day. For the virtual visits, we liaise with the national clinical leads in advance and request that our specialty team are able to open with a short presentation to provide a current overview of the specialty and any pertinent information to assist the clinical leads in their understanding of the service. This leads to a more effective and engaging session for all. You will see our delivery arrow in the toolkit here, and much of what I have described sits within this early phase. Most importantly, we have found that being prepared and engaged from the outset leads to an effective and valuable deep dive session, followed by an early mapping of key actions to kickstart the GIRFT journey.
Good afternoon. My name is Nicola Bailey. I am a Programme Manager from Calderdale and Huddersfield Foundation Trust with Programme Management responsibility for GIRFT across the organisation. And I'll be drawing on the toolkit to provide evidence of what in our experience works. This slide describes to you the benefits we've seen within our organisation, from establishing the approach and supporting processes to delivering GIRFT as described in the toolkit. The first is obviously improving patient outcomes and patient experience, and this happens through challenge within teams and ownership of their service. We have seen reputational benefits to the organisation, as well as learning from cross-cutting themes such as readmissions, length of stay and litigation, and possibly most importantly, collaborative working, as you've already heard from Claire, and that's between executive and clinical teams, external stakeholders and multidisciplinary teams working together as one. And that's led to examples of talent spotting within MDTs, data quality improvement, coding, informatics and support service links. This slide describes the benefits associated with using the process we've developed as featured in the toolkit. You've already seen this process arrow earlier in the presentation, but I'm going to focus on the latter part, which describes our process in preparing for and delivering the deep dive session, as well as the post-deep dive action plan development process. If we consider some of the more recently launched elements of GIRFT, namely the high volume, low complexity pathways and the National Consultant Information Programme, which many of you will be aware of, we've used the same approach developed to support the discussion on high volume, low complexity pathways and the National Consultant Information Programme with our multidisciplinary teams. Using this already established approach has the benefit of being familiar with the teams and has ensured we integrate different aspects of GIRFT into operational business as usual activity without introducing duplication or additional processes. So to summarise, the key learning from our experience of using the established process detailed in the toolkit, we suggest you adapt and develop the process and approach outlined to suit your organisation, engage with a wide range of colleagues and reflect on what works well as what could be better, and share that learning to evolve the process and approach further, which will help you to regularly review the effectiveness and impact of GIRFT within your organisations. So that's it from me. Thank you for listening, and I'll now hand over to Niraj to summarise the conclusions from our presentation.
So what we've observed as an organisation that's very engaged with GIRFT is that there's a significantly increasing influence and broadening of scope with GIRFT on service delivery and even reconfiguration of services. And therefore, we think it's more imperative than ever that organisations engage and embed GIRFT within their trust, but also potentially on a regional basis. We completely understand that people, when facing this challenge, may feel overwhelmed or hesitant or intimidated by that. But we think this toolkit can help you develop the skills, maturity and experience to deal with any aspects or any facets of the GIRFT programme. And beyond that, develop a constructive two-way conversation with the GIRFT specialty, regional and national teams. We also completely understand that teams are under pressure at the moment and that with COVID there is fatigue. But we think the structure and process designed within this toolkit will help restart, it will help you re-engage with the clinical teams, but ultimately it will benefit both your organisation and, most importantly, the patients we care for. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. That's an excellent presentation. Really enjoyed that, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions to come. And as I said, put questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We can come to them at the panel at the end. Now, what we'd like to do now is just open up a poll to the audience to get some feedback to kick off our first session with the panel. So I don't know if Sophie, if you could bring that up. So what we'd like to know is, what do you consider to be the most challenging aspect of delivering the GIRFT programme? Is it getting appropriate stakeholder involvement? Is it responding to questionnaires and use of data? Is it driving forward actions between meetings? Is it managing GIRFT alongside other priorities, or is it demonstrating the impact of GIRFT? So if you could provide us with a response. Is there any further instructions I need to add, Sophie?
No, that's fine. Just introduce the panel and then we'll continue with show the poll after the panel has been introduced.
Brilliant, thank you. So if I can move to the panel now, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. So can we start with Owen? Is he there?
Thanks, Ruth. Hi, my name is Owen Williams and I'm the Chief Executive of Calderdale and Huddersfield NHS Foundation Trust.
Great, thanks. And we've heard from Neeraj already, but do you want to say hello again, Neeraj?
Hi, I'm Neeraj. I'm a consultant vascular surgeon at Calderdale and Huddersfield NHS Foundation Trust and Trust clinical lead for GIRFT.
And David?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm David Crampsey. I'm Executive Medical Director at Airedale Foundation Trust. I'm an ENT surgeon by background, and I'm on the panel because we've benefited from the collaborative approach that Calderdale and Huddersfield have shared in terms of development of the toolkit.
Laura?
Hi, I'm the Head of Corporate Recovery Unit encompassing GIRFT and Model Hospital at University Hospitals Plymouth.
And finally, Richard.
So I'm Richard Struthers. I'm a consultant anaesthetist and Deputy Medical Director working with Laura on GIRFT at University Hospitals Plymouth.
Great, thank you. So I don't know if we've able to share the responses to the poll. Right, so biggest response, managing GIRFT alongside other priorities. So I guess, should we just open that question up really? So I think we'll pick on the Chief Executive for that one first. It sounds like the Chief Executive question, doesn't it? Owen, would you be happy to take that?
Yeah, happy to take that. And it's quite an interesting one because it's hard for me to imagine what's a more important priority than looking after our patients and improving their outcomes. So if there are other priorities that people are focused on, and good luck, I guess. It's really, really clear to me that in the GIRFT programme, what I've seen are two things. One, a real focus on improving patient outcomes, but at the same time, what I would call some really great opportunities to see clinical leadership in action for real. And the way I would characterise clinical leadership is a bit what colleagues have talked about in the presentation, as it defined by multidisciplinary teams. This is not about one particular group of clinical colleagues. It's about a blend of clinical colleagues really focused on consistent improvement for patients. So in terms of the managing priorities, I would just really encourage you to kind of not get sidetracked by this. GIRFT is about delivering what I think is most organisations' core priority, which is about improving patient outcomes.
I think I'd be interested for a medical director's view on kind of GIRFT alongside the pressures of COVID. I mean, just David, and if you could comment on prioritising GIRFT alongside COVID.
Happy to do so, Ruth. So I would echo Owen's comments that the power of the GIRFT programme is when this brings out clinical leadership. So I have to say I don't particularly have a problem getting clinical teams to prioritise the GIRFT work, because if it's clinically compelling change of which they have been part, they're coming to my door asking me to proceed at a faster pace rather than the other way around. And I think that's a really powerful message when GIRFT engagement works well. During COVID, inevitably, some of the prioritisation that we wanted to do has paused, but actually some of the change that sits within our GIRFT learning has actually underpinned the way we've worked across multi-professional teams to effect change, which has delivered real benefits in terms of our COVID response, whether that's starting up elective activity again in the most efficient way for patients and for clinical teams, or indeed whether it was radically transforming services during the period of the pandemic. So in reality, we probably have achieved some of our GIRFT objectives during that time, but I think we would all recognise that some of our wider organisational priorities inevitably were impacted by the immediacy of the COVID challenge.
Thank you. I'm just interested in, because there's quite strong responses across the board, but clearly the strongest was the prioritisation. But just thinking about stakeholders, perhaps a question for Richard. I mean, how have you managed kind of less supportive stakeholders, perhaps on the board, with regards to the GIRFT programme?
I think step one is to have a LAURA. So if you can clone your enthusiastic and effective program manager, then that makes everyone's life a lot easier. And then part of it is understanding your colleagues, understanding the pressures that they're under, understanding their motivations. So you will get a whole spectrum of responses from those that engage immediately, are data driven, and are willing to have grown up conversations, through to many of us who are special, and because of our specialness, find lots of reasons why they can't engage, and that just takes time and understanding the pressures they're under, and introducing them to the GIRFT maybe in a gentler manner than you would do with people who are data driven from the beginning. So I wish there was an easy, the toolkit is absolutely here as a guide. I wish there was an easy one size fits all guaranteed to work mechanism for all my clinical colleagues and clinical teams, but often you've got to tailor how you approach things subtly to the pressures that individuals are under, and then they surprise you. Once they get those 5 key metrics and they focus on them, then absolutely some of them will just go for it.
Thank you. It's interesting, actually. I think Tim Briggs would say, that's the first time I've mentioned him today. So yeah, the boss would say, wherever he's been in the country, everybody thinks they're special. And it's interesting that actually, whilst you need to tailor things, that this perspective of everybody special is not, it is universal, but not necessarily correct. But just thinking about how you'd say the best way of building more of that organisational enthusiasm and commitment to GIRFT programming. Clearly, you've done it at Calderdale, Neeraj. I mean, how do you think you did it?
So I'm not keen on the term engagement. So I'll talk about visibility and communication. We, as a core GIRFT team, have been to virtually every fora within our organisation. So we've been to Trust Board, Quality Committee, we're regulars on the Exec Board, Matrons Forums, Clinical Governance, Consultants Meetings. So therefore, we have ensured that everyone within the organisation knows about GIRFT. We've shown the improvements it can deliver, and I noted that was one of the things within the chat about how do you do that, and we've created a repository of improvement, and therefore we can demonstrate that when we're trying to bring people on board. The other thing is that we're there, that the positive approach, we're there to assist people and help, and rather than seek compliance. And I think that's a really important thing. There was also a comment in the chat about financial benefits. Everyone's referenced how this is clinically driven. So when we engage with the clinical teams, we're not talking about finance. And even if you look at the GIRFT reports that we've been through, the finance section is a small part at the very end of any deep dive pack. So we keep it absolutely patient focused. The financial benefits we can calculate in the background. They don't need to be upfront. As Richard said about Laura, we think that the dynamic between what we describe as our core trust team is essential, that we've got that enthusiasm, we have complementary skills to each other, but also that we all have one voice and one approach, so there's absolute consistency, whoever is talking to whichever group. And the final thing I'd like to say is that I can't highlight enough for us how important Owen's direct involvement in this has been. When we go to teams, we know that we could push back and push a little bit harder if we need to, because Owen will have our back, and Owen has that commitment to the team and the GIRFT process. But also, you mentioned commitment and enthusiasm. We have an executive sponsor, and in our organisation, we're fortunate that that's the chief exec, who attends as many events, those 4 that I described earlier, deep dive, action planning meetings, as he can. And therefore, as a role model, that enthusiasm and commitment that Owen describes inevitably then rubs off on the team, and then develops, as coming back to the question, develops that enthusiasm and commitment for the programme across the organisation.
Thank you. It's interesting, actually, you say that, Neeraj, because there might be a correlation between the number of deep dives attended by chief execs in organisations and just the level of impact GIRFT has, because, you know, Owen's a shining example, but there are some other chief execs out there who always prioritise a GIRFT deep dive visit and think it's absolutely critical to attend. Yeah,
so we, as Claire described in our presentation, we used to open up the largest sort of conference area we had within the trust for these, and at points the attendance at the face-to-face deep dives was standing room only. That would include, again, regularly and inevitably, the chief operating officer, director of finance, director of transformation, and then that leads into that collaborative working. Whereas if GIRFT presents this shared view, and it's really important for the teams, if they've been trying to do something and GIRFT then advocates that, you've got the executive team, external stakeholders, as Claire described, the ambulance service or community providers, and the exec team all hearing that message at the same time. And therefore it breaks down barriers and enables that collaborative working to be delivered straight away off the bat at the end of the deep dive.
So taking that point, so you've got people kind of fired up, involved. I'm looking for other words other than engagement, Neeraj. But you've got them on board. And then Laura, your praises have already been sung, but I mean, GIRFT's quite a big programme. As I said, we've got 40 specialties plus cross-cutting themes and litigation, and there's also NSIP as well. I mean, how do you kind of coordinate the large number of recommendations that, you know, especially the bigger trusts must be dealing with? What's been your approach?
Sure, thanks, Ruth. So probably a couple of approaches here. Firstly, one can look at where material impact is greatest in terms of the clinical gain. So that could be capacity, that could be quality, and or it could be outcomes. Equally, you may wish to tackle it around areas of highest variance. So perhaps if that was readmissions, that could be around changing pathways, changing practices, and changing techniques. And it can be quite overwhelming, and therefore it's really important, I think, to have a reasonable distilled time frame of what can and will be focused on and aim to be achieved over a short, medium and long-term approach. And I think working around a 12-month period following a visit and latest data pack is quite a good way to distill that down. I think one of the ways we can work through a breadth of recommendations, because GIRFT often tells us our existing known challenges, but what GIRFT does is it shows us the power of national variation performance, which perhaps we haven't seen before, even though we understand the challenge, or perhaps a gap on best practice that's been recommended from the visit, or perhaps one of the earlier published national reports. And really trying to use GIRFT as a catalyst at that point to support our stakeholders. It increases profile on delivery, it supports solution finding, and most importantly, bringing that all together, it enables specialties to support their ambition. And I think that's so important in terms of what GIRFT can do and bring to at a specialty level, and then collectively to trust at an organisational level.
Thank you. I just wonder whether, can Sifa or Nicola, what challenges you've identified in terms of implementing GIRFT recommendations, and you know how you've overcome them. Sorry, should I go to you? Thanks, Sifa.
I think In terms of the challenges, I think it's important that, as Neeraj has outlined, I think that multidisciplinary approach is really key. It's really important to have the right people on board and talk to the right individuals in your organisation. And that can sometimes circumvent issues becoming bigger than they are, and you can sometimes get answers very quickly. So I think that the recommendations and getting those implemented does become a multidisciplinary team effort. And we emphasised earlier that, you know, having leads for certain actions to drive those actions and then accountable for those actions is quite an effective method in getting things moving. And as Neeraj has already outlined, GIRFT has quite a high profile in our organisation, particularly within our executive team at board level. And having that high profile helps people to understand the importance and the priorities that are part of the organisation's plans to move forward on quality improvement initiatives.
Thank you. We've got a little bit of time, so I just wanted to ask a kind of additional question, perhaps to Neeraj, just thinking about the access to data in Model Hospital. Have you seen people using Model Hospital more, or is it something we still need to push and develop?
I think, well, yes, is the short answer. I think it's really useful. In the early days, it comes back to that whole thing of the data's not right or the data's historic, which is, I think, the most common pushback, call it that we get when we do our introductory sessions. And then it comes back, as Asifa described, and we learned this mantra, call it, from the GIRFT team and from Tim himself, which is, it's your data. So we have used Model Hospital to try and refresh some of that, to update it. We have formed really good links between the departments. Almost now we have individualized links between departments and an informatics person for that specialty, and also a dedicated clinical coder. So they know that through their specialty lead, for example, with the new NSIP work, we've got the service leads for the NSIP. They know who their informatics and coding liaison people are. So they can coalesce all the questions from the team and just take it to those individuals and work with them. And Model Hospital very much is involved in that refresh of the data. I think moving forward, I think we want to see, as we're now getting with the NSIP, a more contemporaneous picture of the data. And I think that helps engagement. It helps, as Asif has described, moving forward with action plans. But yeah, I mean, Model Hospital is a significant part of that data review and what we're doing internally through informatics.
I should explain, actually, NSIP isn't universal. They're still on quite a rollout program. So I think more information about NSIP is available, I think, on our website, or if it's not there, we'll post a link to the relevant website. So I'm just going to give everybody a heads up. I'm going to ask you all what would be your kind of golden piece of advice about implementing GIRFT. And we've not heard from Claire so far. So if I start with Claire and then I'll open that question up to everybody else. So Claire, what would be your main piece of advice?
I think my main piece of advice would actually be looking at that patient pathway and each part of the workforce that actually interacts in that pathway to make sure you've got the full patient pathway covered. For example, it's not just about your specialist nurses coming to the deep dives, it's your ward nurses, it's your outpatient nurses, you know, it's your matrons. It's actually that full multidisciplinary approach.
Brilliant, thank you. So let's go around. So Richard.
Struggling to get myself off mute. I'm sorry, beginner error. So some of the things that are really effective are basking in the achievements that have already happened early in the process. So when you get a national deep dive in and you've actually already achieved that, yeah, that's a little boost to your clinical teams that they are absolutely on the right journey, and that helps with the engagement of taking things forward where they haven't actually managed to achieve things so far. So yeah, take the positives, go with the positives wherever you can get them, and then use that as a building block to going forward.
Thank you. So Asifa, this is going to get harder the longer at the end of the trail, isn't it? Asifa, over to you.
I think from my experience and the work that I've done with teams in their action planning and setting those actions, I think the clinical engagement is really important, and identifying and having the clinicians and the clinical teams, whether it's nursing teams or your medical teams, but having them move some of those actions forward and taking the lead on some of those, I think is really important, and it allows for a much more cohesive and helpful conversation.
Thank you. So Laura?
Thanks. So absolutely identify the challenges which GIRFT highlights, but accept that incremental improvement is still important. It may be a journey that you may be on. And as I said earlier, really, I think GIRFT should be used to seek ambition of excellence in clinical service delivery for specialties.
Thanks. Owen?
Yeah, I think for me, staying patient and colleague focused, making sure that you've got board leadership that really fosters and encourages clinical leadership, and by that I mean multidisciplinary clinical leadership, and having a focused team that's not there necessarily to do all the heavy lifting for everybody, but can help people in specialty departments to really be the best of what they want to be.
Right, thank you. So David?
Yes, for me, one of the key lessons was don't try and do it all on your own. So there's a reason why there's a national approach to this. So one of the things we benefited, first of all, was the work that we did with Neeraj and the team from CHFT. The second thing that was really key for us was the regional implementation team and the GIRFT support through that. So it wasn't just an assurance process coming in to mark our homework and check what we'd done, what we'd said we would do. It was actually often picking up elements of excellence that we had undertaken since the visit and sharing that as case examples, but also giving us some direction on where we were getting a bit stuck. So seeking external support from places that are actually doing it better than you or different to you is really key to this.
It's an important point, because the NHS talks about best practice and sharing learning, but it does sometimes feel like we're shy about asking for that support. So it's kind of a bit counterintuitive when we're looking for others' ways of doing it, but we're too shy to ask for the help. So Nicola, anything to add?
Thanks, Ruth. Yeah, I think I'd probably suggest, as I mentioned in the presentation, adapting and evolving, processes to make them fit for individual organisations is really important. And I know in the time that we've been working with GIRFT and CHFT, we've constantly reviewed and adapted our own processes to fit. I think it's probably more important than ever now with the other pressures in the system. So to have that regular review and also to integrate wherever possible with business as usual as part of that. So GIRFT isn't seen as an additional or an add-on, but it is part of business as usual and supporting operational delivery.
Great. And finally, Neeraj, if you've got anything else to add?
So firstly, just to echo what Owen said, the patient has to be the focus. Just whenever it comes back to any discussions within what we do, the question, and Claire's taught me this, ask the question, what's right for the patient, what's best for the patient. And the only other thing is making sure you get your core team, your trust level team right in terms of dynamic and skill mix. And when I talk about a team, that includes, as I described earlier, an enthusiastic exec sponsor.
Brilliant. And I think that what makes up that core team, as you said, we've got that included in the toolkit and people can refer to that as well. That's brilliant. Great, thank you. That's really helpful. What we'd like to do now is we are going to take questions direct from the audience, but before we do that and open it up to the questions to the panel, what we want to do is kind of catch the mood of the audience through a word cloud. So I think we've posted the link to the word cloud in the chat room. So just ask people if they would like to go onto that and they could post into that, and then we'll be looking at that at the end just to get some feedback. So the question for the word cloud is, what factors are important for making a success of the GIRFT programme? And you can, if you go to the link at menti.com, and there's a code in the chat room, and then we'll get a strength of feeling from the audience regarding that question. Okay, so now we can go to questions directly from the audience. So if I just, okay. So just first question from Gemma. I'm a trust lead for GIRFT. Oh, LTHTR. I'll have to guess at that one. Relatively new role for me, and the trust engagement is good. My main struggle is demonstrating an evidence in the outcomes, both for patients and financially following actions identified at deep dives. Any advice welcomed on how others obtain the info and report? Actually, can I go to Laura for that one to begin with?
Yeah, thank you. So once we've identified our shortlist of 5 key metrics for focus over that 12-month period, we work with our internal performance information team to identify the metric and actually track the performance in terms of improvement. More latterly, a lot of the metrics, as Niraj was explaining earlier on, are actually available through the model hospital now. And it's great to be able to look at the trend line on improvement and demonstrate, subject to the response which was undertaken to the performance, the improvement that's been made. So a lot of the metrics compared to where GIRFT started are actually available, and I'm sure we've got a whole host more coming into the model hospital, into the GIRFT specialty compartments. Financial is difficult because GIRFT is not directly a financial program, and I think actually it's important your colleagues understand that. However, what I would say, if I was trying to evidence financial benefit, I think it's often perhaps in the value of the quality which is delivered. So if you're looking at a good length of stay, you can look at bed days avoided and the cost on a bed day basis. So as I say, if it's not directly cost out or additional income in, it could be capacity releasing. So how many more patients in a session you might be able to see, or as I say, they might be cost avoidance with perhaps how you deliver activity in an outpatient setting rather than a day case, optimising clinical efficiencies.
Great, thanks. Actually, interesting question about approach to involving patients in the QI process as part of the programme. That's an interesting question when it comes to GIRFT. Just wonder, who can I go to? Say, Richard or Niraj, would you be able to respond to that? Richard's first off mute, so he gets it.
It shows I can learn where the mute button is. So I don't think we've been as good at that as we could be. Yeah, I think that's somewhere, you know, we may not be unique in that, where it has been very much focused on the clinical team and an expectation that will then focus on what patients want rather than directly going to patient teams. So absolutely something we can learn from and improve on.
Great.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I don't think that I think it's an area for development, and something that Owen flagged as well is involved. You know, we've been better in terms of, it started off with the clinical director. We broadened it out to the whole team. We broadened it out to the MDT, as Claire described. We broadened it out to ward nursing, outpatient nursing, allied health professionals, and another group that Owen described getting involved was the junior doctors. And I think that's really important because it sets them up early and that brings them that knowledge of GIRFT early on in their careers. So yes, absolutely take on the patient involvement point, and it is massively important and something that we need to get better at. But another group we're looking at involving are the junior doctors as well.
Actually, just on the junior doctors, that is a group that from GIRFT Central we're interested in talking to. So there is a national GIRFT fellow who tends to work alongside Tim Briggs, but we are looking to develop a kind of pilot with 2 trusts around a trust-based GIRFT fellow. So fingers crossed we can get that off the ground, and we'll let people know what happens with regards to that. Just a question around standardisation. Is there an expectation that all trusts will use the toolkit? I think that one's probably for me. No, I mean, GIRFT, we're not a regulatory part of the framework within NHS. There's no requirements for anybody to do so, but the intention of the toolkit is to give the best practice, and we're not necessarily looking for reducing variation in how you undertake your embedding GIRFT, But I think, you know, why wouldn't you learn from best practice and what others are doing out there? There will be variation, but I think that's the whole purpose of the toolkit, is just best practice. It does make life easier for the GIRFT team, obviously, if things are similar, but it has to be what's right for you, so there's no direct requirement for you to implement it. So a question here about, how do you present GIRFT from ward to board? Do you use existing governance committees or direct to the chief officer executive team? Actually, shall I probably, can I ask Nicola that question?
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. So we've established quite a strong governance reporting arrangements within the organisation that cover all aspects of internal specialty team, directorate, forums, right through to quality committee, weekly exec committees and trust board. But that sits alongside the ongoing, and I'm going to use the word engagement that Niraj doesn't like, continuous engagement with teams and different colleague groups across the organisation. So we run the two in parallel. And the reporting, the internal reporting, is really twofold. It's firstly to celebrate the successes and the achievements that the team have achieved, and the actions and the improvements that they've successfully delivered, as well as highlighting any areas for additional support or any barriers or challenges that they're facing. And we find that having that two-way dialogue throughout the organisation continues that two-way dialogue that's initiated at Deep Dive, right through from the teams to, you know, the divisional senior management and leadership team, right through to exec level and chief exec level. And that's really helped continue that enthusiasm and that motivation within colleagues that they get from the initial Deep Dive work and the support. So that works really well. But again, you know, back to my point, that has to fit within each individual's organisation and you know, governance structures and reporting.
So David, you're going to add to that?
Yeah, so it's a great question. It's a live one that we are considering at the moment. So at clinical divisional level, I'm really clear that GIRFT reporting sits in that integrated review that will take place in our divisional boards. But paradoxically, it becomes a bit more siloed when you get to board committee level. And we're having a live conversation about whether our GIRFT work would be overseen in our Finance, Digital and Performance Committee or our Quality and Safety Committee. And the reality is it probably needs to sit across both. And that's what we're considering at the moment, is how do we make sure that we have that integrated view that takes into account the people impact, the positive people impact of some of this GIRFT work in terms of our colleagues in the organisation, as well as the potential financial benefit that might be derived, the performance impact, and above all that quality and patient experience impact. So I think my view would be continue to have a conversation in your organisation about what that needs to look like if it doesn't feel quite right, and it might be an iterative process in the organisation. But above all, there's that real equipoise we've got to strike between GIRFT being seen as a programme in itself, which has been that powerful lever for change, but equally it needs to be absolutely integrated with your normal organisational functions, because if it ends up being too separate, then actually that can be challenging in itself from the engagement perspective. Just to trigger Niraj again, that E word.
Actually, can we just have a quick look at the word cloud, just to get a view of some feedback? Oh, sorry, Niraj, engagement's right at the heart. It's a bit like the journey. Do you think it's getting overused, that word?
Yeah, it's not the act of engagement. It's more. To me it sounds like a very it sounds like a corporate task rather than something you do.
So, but actually, it's interesting. So we've got leadership, clinically led data, patient focus, but interesting saying perhaps we all need to think a bit more about the patient involvement as well. I think that's accepted, and that's something for us to take away, actually. Yeah, multidisciplinary, patient-centered, executive support. So yeah, some quite pleasing, strong kind of words coming through on that word cloud. So we've got just a few minutes left, so I can take a couple more questions. Owen, there's an interesting, quite cheeky question here, and I think you've tried to answer it already, but certainly this individual wants a bit more help. They're asking directly, how do you motivate board and executives so in an organisation where they clearly feel they could be more motivated?
Yeah, that question caught my eyes from Marion. Thanks, Marion, for the question. I would characterise it this. Colleagues have been, describing my involvement in this. It's not very hard because it's one of my favourite conversations and meetings to be involved in, particularly the deep dive sessions. And whether we're doing it virtually now or as we have outlined before when we had to have standing room only in some instances, it's a real opportunity because to some degree, some clinical colleagues have to be quite brave because, they're putting themselves out there and there's somebody external to the organisation coming in and giving a view. And that's actually quite a scary place because it's not only somebody external to the organisation, it's somebody who's expert. The benefit for somebody like myself, and as colleagues will know, and I often get ribbed on this, I don't have a clinical bone in my body. So one of the best things about a GIRFT review is I actually get to understand what we do. And I start thinking to myself, what board executive or non-executive director wouldn't want to understand what it is that people do and what impact it has on patients, and whether there are other parts of the country and the world that are doing things that we can learn from, or equally, we're doing things that other people can learn from. I always remember particularly a diabetes review that we had, and there was a bit of anxiety going into the diabetes review because we didn't have, for example, the level of consultants that might have compared. But actually some of the feedback that came out was that the kind of nurse-led model that we had was potentially an exemplar for elsewhere. And it didn't just end up being a set of words in a GIRFT conversation with us. We know that that subsequently became a conversation in other GIRFT reviews about there's alternative ways of doing it. So my thought process to Marion is, what executives in the world that we currently occupy wouldn't want to be involved in this type of work? And let's just say there are those executives who still, maybe on hearing that, don't think they should be bothered. Well, actually, the focus on high volume, low complexity is going to mean that they're going to have to get involved. And if we see the steps further, maybe at ICS level, where there's talk of hubs and so on and so forth, and I think the jury's still out on some of that, some of that links back to GIRFT. Now, in saying that, I don't want to frighten people off and make people think that we're going to lose the spirit of GIRFT, because I think if we've lost the spirit of GIRFT, which is the clinical MDT leadership element, patient focus, then actually we'll turn people off. But if you are in a situation where you're in a trust and you see that your leadership is not really focused on GIRFT, I mean, please feel free to reference people in my direction, whatever else, because I think there's a bit of, wake up and smell the coffee, folks.
Can I just do a follow-up from me personally? Do you think it would be helpful if GIRFT tried to help and support non-executive directors in understanding about the programme? Would that help at the board level? Yeah,
you see, for me, Ruth, one of the things that I think we've got going on here, I mean, there's been reference to it, but actually what we've got is we've got a unitary board perspective on GIRFT. Our chair of our Finance and Performance Committee, our chair of our Quality Committee, who are both non-executive directors, have a real view about the impact of GIRFT. Now, they might have a slightly different lens when they look at it, but the joining piece is certainly what the patient outcomes are, and certainly actually what does it mean for staff and clinical colleagues who are involved in the improvement journey that we're on. So I would say, yeah, do not be frightened about getting non-executive directors involved in this piece. Because the more people that you get focused on it, guess what? It gets attention and then it gets traction.
Great. Well, listen, I'm going to draw things to a close there. So I just want to say thank you to the panel. and for all your hard work. I think it's been really successful and useful session, and obviously behind all this is a very well thought through toolkit, and some great videos as well to support the implementation of the toolkit. So thanks everyone for your input, and thanks for your input today. And for those behind the camera, to Ed, Alison, Sophie as well, can I thank you. Just as I draw it to a close then, I just want to say that, as I said earlier, GIRFT transferred over to NHS-EI. Oh, we've got a response popped up. Hang on, let me get around to that in a second. Yeah, so there was a question in about GIRFT, as we move forward. So if I just sum up with regards to GIRFT moving forward, now that we've moved to NHS-EI, the good thing about that is, we are a permanent fixture at NHS-EI with funding. Clearly, our focus is continuing at the moment to be HVLC, but we will be finishing the current 40 specialties that still need to deliver. The good news today is that one of the benefits of working in NHS-EI is we've now been able to publish 18 of our national reports. So they're all out today. I think you'll be able to access them via our best practice library website. So, and they're all officially published today, which is great news. And also, as we move forward, you'll see more coming from GIRFT with regards to supporting people through the GIRFT Academy as well. So we're really looking forward to taking the programme forward. But like everybody else, we've got kind of COVID and elective recovery to address as well at the time being. So finally, the question there, would it be helpful for the GIRFT team to produce some high-level guidance to explain how GIRFT initiatives should interact with integrated care systems? Oh, that's an overwhelming response. Thank you for that. Yeah, I think that makes sense. And you'll see us talking more about support to systems as well as our programme matures and the work streams mature too. So anyway, so that's a brief summary of where GIRFT is and where we're moving to the future, but today's about the toolkit. So again, I'll encourage everybody to go to the best practice library to access the toolkit, and the guys today have given their names and the contacts, so you'll be able to access additional support through the website as well. Thank you everybody for giving up your time today, and enjoy the rest of the day, and I hope it's not too taxing for everybody. Thank you.